Welcome back and hello if you are new guys, and I hope that all of you have had a really great week. So if you've not followed me before, basically every month I do this kind of like a monthly favourites segment where I choose 10 albums that I think are really fantastic. It doesn't necessarily have to be new releases of this month, but they're just kind of albums that I've really kind of got into. So first of all, I always kick off something with my feature favourite, which is essentially kind of one of the favourites which really blew me away and I wanted to kind of highlight. And for this month, it goes to Bell Witch and Aerial Ruin's brand new album, Stygian Bow Volume 1. Now, this is a collaboration that was very much long in the making. The thing is though, Bell Witch and Aerial Ruin, otherwise known as Eric Mogridge, have actually been collaborating for quite a while, and my first sort of experience with them was on Mirror Reaper, which was an absolutely fantastic record. You know, Eric Mogridge's tenuous kind of vocal delivery, but also his patterns really does add to that sense of kind of escapism. I also think that there's a little bit more going on this time round instead of, you know, just having Bell Witch, so the two of them really do complement each other. There's a real sense of melancholy on the record for sure, but then there's also a kind of uplifting sort of sense in the melodies. There are different lead guitar sections, for example, and vocal cadences which have been hinted at but maybe not kind of used as much, and also the fact that, you know, Aerial Ruin is part of the focal point of this release allows for, you know, Eric Mogridge's vocals to really kind of come through and take center stage. So I definitely recommend this release. It came out this month via Profound Law Records, and you should definitely at least give it a listen. It's a fantastic album. Now, Ulthar are a band that have come off 20 Buck Spin and really do combine the sense of kind of morbid angel death metal meets almost like a black metal style in the vocal, but then they have this almost Voivodian style thrash, which is very much kind of sci-fi led to their sound. And what I really love about them, and you know, one of the reasons they are here in my favourites, is that they just kind of turn songs on their head, which I really like. They have a really great sense of groove, and overall the dynamics of the song really pushes it forward. It's definitely more progressive where the instruments are kind of concerned. For example, on Through Downward Dynasties, that's a great track that, again, you know, turns things on its head and did a lot of things that I didn't necessarily expect would happen from death metal. This is another 20 Buck Spin release, and definitely one that caught my eye early on. I've been listening to this album non-stop, and it, for me, channels that perfect element of, you know, what made the 90s such a fantastic era for death metal, and reminds me of, you know, Cynic's Focus, Death's Human, Atheist's Unquestionable Presence, and brings all of those together in this kind of melting pot. But even though I've just cited a whole load of, you know, references of other bands, Void Ceremony totally make it their own at the same time, and I think that's what makes this album such a strong release. They have an absolutely huge sound, so do not sleep on this record because it's absolutely amazing. So, Ohms have released their brand new album Close, which is a follow-up to their absolutely fantastic Exist. Now, Exist was probably one of my favourite records of 2018 when it first came out, and also my first experience of Ohms. And one of the things that kind of really drew me in was the opener, Subjects, which is like a 20-minute song. And although Close is a fantastic album, I think it has more of a sense of immediacy, given the fact that the tracks are shorter and just more packed in. I also think that the interludes where you can hear kind of like, you know, people talking or like sort of just, it sort of sounds like laughter and quite a nostalgic feel. I like those little interludes, and it again adds to that sense of escapism, I think. This is another really great record from Ohms. Living Gate are kind of like a supergroup made up of members of Yob, Oathbreaker and Amun-Ra. And that for me is enough to pique my interest in this band. But the thing is what I really like about this is that it doesn't necessarily sound like any of those bands, but instead sounds like entombed kind of classic Swedish death metal, but with a modern twist as well. I kind of had little hints of like Blood Incantation, you know, that kind of more progressive death metal, but also very underground sounding at the same time. It's definitely a highlight. There's so many dynamics and lots of interesting stuff. This is also just the tip of the iceberg, as it's an EP, so hopefully we'll have an album soon enough. On this 5-track album, the examples of kind of light and dark are shown really, really well, and I like the fact that they decided to kind of play with something that is, you know, as kind of innate as contrast. Glory Glory has these really wonderful cleans and a choir section that does create a sense of vulnerability, but then Apathy Took Helm kind of brings that stoic sound right back to its doom metal roots. But, you know, going back to this idea of contrast, I love how kind of vibrant the album cover is as well, and the fact that, you know, it's against this blue background, but you have that disgusting sense of, you know, like the worms, and I think it's very kind of tactile, and that's very much, you know, kind of a metaphor for what the music is like, and it's definitely a no-holds-barred doom metal record that I would highly, highly recommend. So, Long Distance Calling. Now, the first time I discovered this band was on their Trips album, which has pretty much stayed with me ever since. They're a fantastic blend of instrumental kind of post-prog rock, I guess, but at times metal. But the most important thing, I think, is that they have a real sense of narrative throughout their records, and definitely within their songs. And interestingly enough, this album was pretty much recorded in February and finished during the lockdown. So I think that's really kind of interesting, and it does add a little bit of a different angle on the kind of traditional long distance calling story. It's very much looking at science fiction and the way that man's relationship with machine has essentially evolved, and the various different potential, you know, positives and negatives that have come from that. But overall, it's a very cinematic record that I think you will really, really enjoy. Now, not only do Asian Death Crustacean have probably the best band name I think I've ever heard, they're a fantastic instrumental unit from London that really do kind of create a sense of story. Like I said, you know, I've just spoken about Long Distance Calling, and it's similar. You know, it's very hard to have a sense of a thread in what can often be a bit of a labyrinth in an instrumental band. An album that follows the ideas of one Ian Malcolm, Baikal essentially explores the idea of order and chaos, and how the two have essentially responded from one another, and how it can often be very unpredictable, just like our Malcolm's chaos theory.
Repeat and vastly affect the outcome. That's one.
Unpredictability.
All right. There. Look at this. See? I'm right again. Nobody could have predicted that Dr. Grant would suddenly jump out of a moving vehicle.
But essentially, in terms of sound, you'd be looking at kind of almost like Scale the Summit, but a little bit heavier. They have those very sleepy, I call them kind of like cloudy instrumental moments where you just feel like you're floating, but then they smack you back down with more of a kind of progressive metal acrobatic style. This is classic death doom from the land of New York City, and definitely not one to sleep on. The album was mastered by one Arthur Rizk, who, if you're not familiar, has worked with Power Trip and also Tomb Mold as well, so it has that kind of really, I feel like it's like an 80s style sound. There's a huge amount of atmosphere on this one and has an almost kind of like cathedral sense of darkness on it. They're also being released via Carbonized Records, which is one of the members of Necrot's own record label. So when you've got, you know, someone who's putting that kind of music out, already it has a very big accolade, and that's kind of what made me really go for them. Now, the record is made up of 4 super long tracks, but the most important thing for me is that sense of cinema to it, and I think it really does tell a story. In terms of sound, you're looking at kind of like traditional Death Doom, but there's a real kind of sense of widescreen on this one. Ash's Coalesce definitely has that sense of grandiose to it, but also has a real sense of opulence as well, I think, with especially like the piano that is brought in, and also there are some really interesting kind of female vocals that are drawn in to create a little bit more of a rich sonic tapestry that I think people will really love. But again, this was another one that almost kind of slipped under my radar, but I'm really glad that I was able to see this, and definitely recommend this to all of you guys. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and hopefully you found one of your new favorite bands. If that's the case, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe to my videos. So I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you next month and very soon for another album review. Take care, my friends.